Okay. Erev Tov. So we are tonight and tomorrow is Yud Zayin Tammuz. Tonight the date is Yud Zayin Tammuz. Tomorrow we'll start fasting. Obviously those who are able to physically. It's very hot, so it's a bit challenging. So I recommend staying indoors with air conditioning as much as you can. Remember last year I was in England. They were going through a heat wave. An actual heat wave, not just by English standards, and was going to Yud Zayin Tammuz. People didn't know what to do. It was unheard of, fast in the heat. They never heard of such a thing, and there were all sorts of psakim going out in terms of what people should do. There was a problem because they don't have air conditioning. But thankfully, that we have over here. But so Yud Zayin Tammuz has a double function in terms of it is on the one hand a fast day in and of itself, one of the 4 tzomot HaChurban that we have. And it also marks the beginning of the period of the 3 weeks, Bein HaMetzarim, period of mourning leading up to Tisha B'Av, and we have different customs, different halachot, different restrictions throughout this period, which obviously change according to how far we go into. As we get closer to Tisha B'Av, more things, more restrictions are in place. We'll talk about it a little bit. So just in terms of Tisha B'Av itself, the fast. So the Mishnah tells us. The Mishnah tells us, and then the Shulchan Aruch brings it down as well, that there are both on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, there were 5 things which happened. On each of these days, 5 things happened, 5 calamities, and as a result of that, we fast. So the Shulchan Aruch says, we get the Siman Taf Kuf Mem Tet, which talks about the heading of the Siman is Lehitanot Arba'at Somot, that we have 4 fast days. The Rambam, when he brings us in Hilchot Tanyot as well, he says that whenever, this is something we do, which is less common today, but whenever there is a time of trouble for the community, so you can go and declare a fast. This used to be much more common in times of drought, in times when there was no rain, in times of war, etc. But again, nowadays we don't do so many of these voluntary fasts, but there are 4 fasts, he writes, 4 days on which the minhag is of all of Am Yisrael to fast on them universally. So says the Shulchan Aruch, says Chayavim letanot b'Tisha B'Av v'Yud Zayin b'Tammuz b'Gimel b'Tishrei v'Asara b'Tevet. These are the 4 fasts. So he mentions Tisha B'Av first, presumably because of its in terms of severity. It's more strict, even though Yud Zayin b'Tammuz comes first chronologically. Mipnei advarim hara'im she'eru bahem, because of the bad things, because of the calamities that happened on this day. So the Mishnah Berurah here expands. He more or less quotes verbatim the Rambam. I'll read it out to you. It's very important understanding which the Mishnah Berurah brings over here, that these days he says we have to in the Tzubam Rabbanan Shiur, we spoke about Ikar and Tafel. We spoke about that which is primary and that which is secondary regarding brachot. Mishnah Berurah invokes this idea here as well. What is Ikar and what is Tafel? Also when it comes to these fast days, when it comes to Yemei Tanit. So he says, first of all, these 4 days they are from the Nevi'im. He quotes the pasuk in Zechariah. The Tzom HaRevi'i, Tzom HaChamishit, Tzom HaShvi'i, Tzom HaSiri. Right over there explains that it's referring to the numbers, are referring to the months. Tzom HaRevi'i is actually he says Tzom HaRevi'i is the Shiv'Asar b'Tammuz, Shu b'Chodesh Revi'i leminyan HaChodashim. It's the 4th month, so that is not the 4th day of the month. But Tzom HaRevi'i is Shiv'Asar b'Tammuz, Tzom HaChamishi is Tisha B'Av, etc. And then he says Kol Elu Hayamim. Right, on these days, all of Am Yisrael fasts because of the sorrows, because of the calamities which occurred on them. But this is not just it's not just something historical. This is not just a remembrance of what was, but it's important in terms of the present, in terms of what is the function. He says, meaning the point of the fast is to open up your heart, is to cause one, to lead one towards a process of introspection and towards tshuva and changing something. It's not enough just to go through, say 24 hours on Tisha B'Av, but on the other fast day, tomorrow, go through the day, not eating and not drinking. All a person thinks about the entire fast is how hungry I am and how thirsty I am. So we missed the point. Think about what led to this fast. Think about why we're doing it. He says, and this is now quoting from the Rambam, he says, zikaron l'ma'aseinu hara'im u'ma'asei avoteinu. The Mishnah Berurah is quoting the Rambam, but he says this should be a zikaron, should be a remembrance, should be an awakening for our bad ways, our evil actions, and those of our forefathers. Right? Historically, the chronology is wrong. Right? Those who came before us, that is what happened, and we should remember those and what we do as well. No, he changes the order. It's about what we do. We have to think about, as the Gemara says, any generation in which the Beit HaMikdash is not rebuilt, it's as if it was destroyed, as if it's being destroyed now. So we are mourning not for the fact that it was destroyed thousands of years ago. We are mourning for the fact that right now we have not done enough to merit for it to be rebuilt. So he says, right, so it caused these negative things to happen to them and to us. By remembering these things, by remembering what happened, we will improve our ways, etc. On these days, a person needs to think about who they are and what we do and how we can improve. I told you, I promised you a He says the main part doesn't mean you don't have to fast. He says you have to fast as well. But that's not actually the primary goal here. It says by the people of Nineveh and Sefer Yonah that Hashem saw they also had a fast of tshuva, but it says Hashem saw their deeds. Vayar Hashem et masehem. V'amru Chazal tell us, it doesn't say that Hashem saw sakam v'tanitam. Hashem doesn't say Hashem saw their fast and their sackcloth, but he saw et masehem, he saw their deeds. In a certain sense, the fast is only really a preparatory. That is only secondary in order to cause us to do tshuva. So all the more so when it's one day, but when it's one day commencing a period of 3 weeks as well. That's what it's leading to. And he says, so there are those people who, when they are fasting, they go out, they spend the whole day having a tiulim. Again, not a good idea in this weather for other reasons. But they spend the whole day walking around, or bidvarim b'teilim. Somebody told me once, a few years ago, they said, they find it very difficult to fast. So what they do, they had a great plan. There's a film series, which they really enjoyed, not Holocaust documentaries or anything. This was a film series that they enjoy. And he said from the morning, he puts on the first one, he watches 4 or 5 films in a row. This was in days before Netflix. Watches 4 or 5 films in a row, and by the end of the fast, he doesn't even realize that he hasn't eaten all day. And I said, shkoyach. That's not what it's about. So we should remember, again, it doesn't have to make it more difficult than necessary. But you shouldn't spend the day in tiyul and dvarim b'teilim. He says, tafsu atafel ve'nichu ha'ikar. People, if that's the way you spend the fast, you've grabbed onto that which is secondary, but you've completely missed the point. You've lost the primary. So then says the Mishnah Berurah, now don't get too clever here. Don't say, well, it's going to be difficult for me to fast, so I'm going to leave the fast. I'm just going to do tshuva. Again, not talking about somebody who is unable to fast for health reasons. That's different. That in such a case, person is required to. But he says, don't just say, I'm going to take the tshuva and skip the fast. No, you need to do both. We have a mitzvah from the Nevi'im that we have to fast on these days. And say that includes Zayin B'Tammuz, which is tomorrow, and Tisha B'Av 3 weeks later. So what are the 5 things? The 5 things which happened on Tisha B'Av, on Shiv'Asar B'Tammuz, right? Bo nishtabro luchot kshe'arad Moshe min ha'ar. Moshe Rabbeinu came down. The first set of luchot were smashed, broken. Kimforash b'Torah. Ubutal tamid od milakriv v'bayit rishon. The tamid offering, which was brought every single day, that was when it was stopped. There was no longer enough animals, and they weren't able to bring the korban tamid. Right? Not by coincidence. Shiv'Asar b'Tammuz. We always read Parashat Pinchas, very close to it. And Parashat Pinchas is one of 2 places where we have the mitzvah of korban tamid, which was brought twice a day, every day. So the korban tamid was stopped. That was on Shiv'Asar b'Tammuz. V'huvka'a ha'ir b'churban bayit sheni. The walls of the city were breached. That is the famous one. Saraf apostomus al rashat Torah, burnt Sefer Torah. V'amad tselem be'echal, and an idol was placed inside the Beit HaMikdash. Those were the 5 things. And the combination of those 5, each one of those on its own might have warranted a fast day, but certainly the combination of all 5. So that is Yud Zayin B'Tammuz in terms of, in and of itself, being a day of tragedy, a day of mourning, a fast day. At the same time, it begins, we said, this period of 3 weeks of Bein HaMetzarim. Now, what's very interesting is that when you look in the, as I say, so certain restrictions, right, throughout the generations, different restrictions of mourning have been added, both in terms of intensity and in terms of the time, right? A lot of these things are based on minhagim. None of them came later. The most intense time is, of course, Tisha B'Av, when we get to the end, on the day itself, which has the 5 New Year, which is similar to Yom Kippur in a certain sense, in terms of the restrictions, not eating and drinking, and further than that. Before that, we have Shavua Shechalbo, the week in which Tisha B'Av falls, which according to everybody, we don't eat meat and we don't drink wine and other things. From Rosh Chodesh Av, Maariv says that Misha Nichnas Av Matin B'Simcha. From the time that we begin Chodesh Av, we reduce. We don't have too much happiness. Very, very happy activities. We reduce from Rosh Chodesh Av, and certain things, certain customs already from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, according to the Ashkenazi custom. So not having weddings, not having haircuts, and listening to music, etc. But if you look through the Gemara, right, you don't actually find. You look through Chazal. You look through, even when you get to the Shulchan Aruch, you don't find Hilchot Bein HaMetzarim in the Shulchan Aruch. You don't find the 3-week period. And as I mentioned, a lot of the restrictions we have, certainly from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz until Rosh Chodesh Av, the Ashkenazim are much more stringent than the Sfaradim. A lot of it is minhagim, which came later. If you look the way the Shulchan Aruch actually phrases it, Stiman Tav Kuf Nun Aleph is called Dinei Shavua Shechal Tisha B'Av Liot B'Tocho. And I would expect it to be, based on our practice and based on our minhagim and based on everything that we know that we do, we'd expect it to be the siman of Dinei Bein HaMetzarim. Shulchan Aruch doesn't say that. He says these are the dinim of Shavua Shechal Tisha B'Av. It's of the week of Tisha B'Av. And if you go through the halachot, right, the first halacha says the Shulchan Aruch. He says Mish Nichnas Av Mematin B'Simcha. When Av begins, we reduce our happiness. He says if you have a court case, for example, a Jew with a non-Jew, he says this is not a good time to do it. If it's in Chodesh Av, try and get it pushed off to a different time. This is not the time when we have good mazah. And he goes on. He says in the next halacha, he says Merosh Chodesh Ad Ta'anit Mematin B'Masa U'Matan B'Binyan Shel Simcha, etc. From Rosh Chodesh Av until the Ta'anit, until Tisha B'Av, we reduce certain activities which are going to cause Simcha. Essentially, there are 3 types of activities which we reduce in this period. Again, in different parts of it, different levels of intensity. One is things which bring to Simcha, things which lead to celebration and happiness. One is things which encompass an element of sakana, of danger, right? Things which are very dangerous, you shouldn't do the entire year. But there's a certain level of risk which is allowed in certain reasons. But certain things which we might do, which are particularly risky, so those should be avoided during this time of year. And one should be extra vigilant, take extra caution. There is a third category as well, which in certain cases relating to hesecha, which may correspond with the previous categories as well in certain cases, but that's related to hesecha dat. So it's related to distraction. Certainly on Tisha B'Av itself and the days leading up to it, we can talk about certain activities which would distract you from the avelut, from the morning of the Churban. You should avoid them. Shouldn't get too busy with other things. But in any event, all these things, says the Shulchan Aruch, he talks about it from Rosh Chodesh, and he talks about it from Shavua Shechalbo, and comes along the Ramah in a couple of places, and he says, for example, so says the Ramah, we have a custom that we don't have weddings already from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, not just from Rosh Chodesh. And then a few halachot later, it goes through the Shulchan Aruch, gives different examples, and once again, he talks about washing and talks about haircuts, etc. And again, says the Ramah, already haircuts, says the Ramah from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. So what we see is that although on the one hand we have these 3 weeks, this Bein HaMetzarim, this entire period, which we look at as a period of mourning, Certainly for the Ashkenazim, and the Rama already defines halachic expression from Yud Tammuz. For the Shulchan Aruch, it seems most of the restrictions, most things only begin a little bit later, from Rosh Chodesh Av and maybe from Shavua Shechal. One practice which we have, which where it does find halachic expression already from the beginning, is that throughout these 3 weeks, when it comes to the Haftarah on Shabbat, so we have the Tlata de Puranuta, we have the 3 Haftarot which we read. Later on, we'll read the Shiva de Nechamta, the 7 Haftarot leading up to Rosh Hashanah of comfort. But now we read three Haftarot relating to Puranut, relating to the tragedy, to the Churban, etc. And that is read on each of the 3 weeks of Bein HaMetzarim, beginning Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. So says Rav Soloveitchik, if the Haftarah is always has to be Meinyana Diyoma, it's related to where we have a special Haftarah because of the time of year, not related to the parasha necessarily, but it's related to what the time of year is. And therefore he says the idea is that this time of year already we see from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz we're beginning this idea of mourning, and that's part of the Inyan Diyoma, and that is why that's what we read. I'll just say, let's end off with this with one ha'ara, which will help us maybe understand why the process goes so gradually, which is this: the Gemara says that there's a distinction between what it calls avelut yeshana and avelut chadasha. When it comes to mourning, so when a person has lo aleinu, a relative dies, and a person has to sit shiva and shloshim, etc., and finds himself as an avel, that is called avelut chadasha, because that is something that has just happened. That is something a person who has lost that relative. There is a spontaneous outpouring of grief, of mourning that takes one over. Nobody has to tell them. Nobody has to tell the person in mourning, now you have to cry. That's what happens naturally. That's what when it comes to the period that we're entering now, this is what we call avelut yeshana. We've been doing this for 2,000 years. It's something. It's not so spontaneous. We say, wake up one day and say, okay, let's enter the mode of mourning now. Now everybody begin crying. Okay, it was a long time ago. It's things we don't always think about it. We don't necessarily relate to it as easily, and therefore there's a gradual sort of easing in towards this process. We begin from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, where at least we're aware of it. We may have some restrictions according to the Ashkenazim, more according to the Sfardim less. But slowly, as we enter, we get to Rosh Chodesh, we get to Shavua Shechal, we get to Tisha B'Av, and there's a time of gradually intensifying the identification we have with this idea of mourning, gradually intensifying the feelings of loss and of mourning until we get to Tisha B'Av, where we can really feel the loss that we have of the Churban, try and connect to that, and try and do what we can, not just to mourn and remember what happened in the past, but try and do what we can to correct our ways now, in order that it should not be a time of mourning, and these days should turn into Yamim Tovim and days of Simcha. רבי חנניה בן עקשיא אומר אצל הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות ישראל לפיכך בא להם תורה ומצוות שני מעדני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיר תורה ויד